Hey everyone, Charlie here. Welcome back to One Cup Japan. This is a show where we have a conversation over something good that soothes you. It's been a little while since we made one of these. Today we are having a very fancy cup of tap water. So, talk about a couple things right off the bat. I do want to let those of you on Patreon know that probably just after this video or possibly tomorrow, I'm going to be making an announcement about the changes coming to Patreon. Because quite honestly, the way things have been recently, I don't think it's really been worth it for anyone to support Patreon, and I want to make some changes to, well, hopefully change that. So, anyway, a couple things to talk about today. To be honest, I had made a video about 2 weeks ago talking about sort of like how the United States is viewed internationally. And I made it just before the election, and I think maybe emotions were high, and I think I said some stuff that I didn't really want to say necessarily, or I wanted to say it, but not in the way I had said it. So I want to kind of touch on the view of America from Japan, at least that which I've experienced, and also I want to talk a bit about Japanese healthcare, I suppose. So I suppose I'm going to actually talk about those in the reverse order that I just introduced them, but I did want to talk about how, well, basically, I mentioned a couple times on the channel in the last couple videos that maybe I've been having a little bit of health trouble. And the thing about it is that basically every year around this time I have kind of the same issue, which is like suddenly I can't breathe very well for about 3 or 4 months at a time. And it's something that I never had trouble with as a child. I never had asthma. I'm a half marathon runner, that kind of thing. So breathing has never been an issue for me, and in fact, it's been important because I do really enjoy running and hiking and that kind of thing. And so after I came to Japan, probably the second year I was here, but it would have been the first full year I was here, when the sort of the autumn and the winters came around, it was terrible. It was like somebody was just taking like my windpipe and crushing it, and like all of the bronchioles in my chest were just all like, it's almost like I could feel them inflaming and producing mucus, right? So lovely image for you there. But anyway, so every year I would go to the doctor, to the hospital, and I would say, look, something's going on. It may be bronchitis. It feels like it could be bronchitis. And they're like, yeah, it's probably bronchitis. And I would get x-rays and that kind of thing. And they're like, well, your chest doesn't look all that swollen right now. It's a little swollen, but it's not so bad. And I was like, okay, but I still can't like sleep very well, like most nights and that kind of thing. Like, I'm tired a lot of the time. I get winded really easily, and this happens for 3 or 4 months. There's got to be something you could do. And they're like, yeah, best we can do is give you like a cough suppressant and like God, what is the word? Like an expectorant, something that'll make you kind of cough out the mucus and sort of clear up your lungs and make it a little bit easier for you to breathe and that kind of thing. And this sort of repeats itself for years at a time, right? And so this year the same thing happens, and I'm like, okay, what is going on? Like, there's nothing that I'm doing that, I'm not being really exposed to anything or exposing myself to anything that should sort of, annually, that should give me this kind of problem. And, I had started thinking last year that because of my place had been so close to a rice field. Literally, it was like right next door to a rice field, that maybe I had an allergy to rice, basically, to the rice plant, I should say, and the pollen that comes out of the rice field. And I had mentioned this to the doctor last year, and he was like, oh, okay. And then he just sort of blew me off, right? He just sort of blew me off, and it was like, whatever. And yeah, and this year, finally, I was talking with my partner, and, we were just like, okay, well, let's look into this for ourselves a little bit more, basically. And what we had settled upon was basically like adult onset asthma kind of thing. And the way asthma works, right, is that generally speaking, once you get asthma, you kind of always have asthma. It's sort of like, it's just a matter of like how aggravated it is, right? So asthma, I'm sure you're aware of it. Most people are aware of it from like a layman's standpoint, but what happens is with asthma, the tiny little like hairs, the tiny little things inside of your lungs called bronchioles. I think that's right, bronchioles, if I'm remembering my nursing school correctly. They inflame, and what happens is they close up, and then they get filled with mucus, and so it's really, really difficult for air to travel through that, and obviously that means that you can't get air throughout your body and all that kind of stuff, and whatever. And as I say, the thing with asthma is that it's always activated, right? You always have asthma, but right, if you're exposed to, for example, if you're allergic to cats, then it just suddenly it'll really, really flare up, that kind of thing, due to allergies or to dust or to exercise, depending on what your trigger is, that kind of thing. And upon reading through the symptoms and that kind of thing, because I never considered adult onset asthma, again, because I didn't have asthma as a child, although my brother did. I was like, okay, well, this is a really big problem, because this means kind of potentially throwing away the things that I love, basically, right? Needing to get rid of hiking, getting rid of running, and and it also means like trying to find a way to stay healthy, because like I've been gaining weight, because like it's just I don't know what I can do safely, and that kind of thing, or I didn't know what I could do safely. And so that was the first option, is that just suddenly I developed adult asthma, basically. And then the second option was that I was experiencing sort of semi-permanent asthma-like symptoms because of some kind of allergic reaction that was happening. And this turns out to be the answer, right, after a lot of prodding. Basically, I am allergic to enit, right, the rice plant, the pollen that it puts off, the dust that it puts off after it's harvested, and that kind of thing. And so after 5 years of trying to struggle through this, sorry, that was a dish that was terrifying. That was terrifying. Finally, I've got medication if I need to use it, and I've made some lifestyle changes to make sure that the air that I'm breathing is clean when I'm in my apartment, and not some lifestyle changes, but for example, air cleaners, and of course wearing a mask because of the corona situation actually helps that a little bit. But anyway, all of this background story leads me into kind of what I want to talk about with what my experience has been with Japanese healthcare. And I want to come right off the bat and say that as an American person, Japanese healthcare is generally speaking much better in my experience and the experience that I had in the States. Maybe I talked about it before on the channel, but a couple years ago I had a bad bike accident where I broke this bone in my face in two places, here and here. And I didn't break it, but I had some serious injury in my arm, which made it difficult to write and things like that for about 3 or 4 months. And anyway, it doesn't matter about the injuries, but the point is that I was hospitalized for 3 days. And after that, I was given medication and a bunch of follow-up x-rays and all that kind of thing. I had to have some MRIs and things like that done on a periodic basis to make sure there wasn't any brain damage or sort of brain damage that came after and that kind of thing. And after all this, I got the bill, or what would have went on the bill, and it was going to be like, about $3,000. It would have been about $3,000 American. And then after my insurance took care of it, I paid nothing. I paid nothing. And in fact, I got a little bit back to cover lost wages and stuff like that. And actually, it completely covered any wages I would have lost, although I didn't because of the way my company pays salary. So that part is really, really good, right? But money is good, and it's important, and it's fine, and all that kind of stuff. But the right, in that kind of situation, it's really, really great. But also what I have found is that if I am not sort of a very, very strong self-advocate for saying, no, I think this is what's wrong with me, please check this, then I'm basically like, okay, well, kind of get out of here. We already told you what we're going to do. It's time to go, that kind of thing. And I think, of course, I don't know, this is not backed up by anything other than anecdotal evidence, but I think it's part of just the fact that, right, anybody can go to see a doctor anytime for low cost, right? Like I can go, again, to the hospital that I usually go to. It's like, if it's just a checkup like what I'm talking about now, it's like, I go and maybe, unless it's a really busy day, I wait like half an hour and I get in to see the doctor. And then even after medication, even after I get like my script and I go to pay for it, like probably everything totals about $25 or $30, something like that. So the time expenditure and the financial cost is significantly decreased from what it would be in the States. And generally speaking, I think it works out okay. But as I say, these are things that I was struggling with for 5 years, and no matter how much I said, well, starting from last year, no, listen, I think it's not bronchitis. Like, I don't think it's what you're saying it is. Like, I need to get a second opinion, which is what I ended up doing. Like, they're just like, no, you're good. Like, it's not that. It's just, it's something you're gonna have to deal with going forward. And if I had accepted that and just been like, okay, then even now, you would hear it. Like, you just hear this, like, every time I took a breath, because it was that bad, kind of thing. And that's part of why videos have been so few and far between, because it's only been within the past 2 weeks or so that this has really been resolved. And so all of this to say that for all of the things that are good and great about Japanese healthcare, the cost, the access, everything like that, it is my opinion, based on my experience as someone who worked within that healthcare industry for a number of years before moving over here, and as someone who is, of course, a patient within that system, that is one of the biggest flaws here, is how common it is for doctors to write you off. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in the States, but in my opinion, doctors are more likely to take that kind of thing seriously when you say, no, I think it's this, probably because they'll get the shit suit out of them if they ignore a potential problem, I would say. So all I want to say is that for anybody who's going to be coming over here, whenever they can actually come over here, unless you're coming over on like a working visa or something like that, that to be your greatest self-advocate, your greatest advocate at the hospital. If you think there's something wrong with you, you gotta say so, because otherwise, and to add to that is, if you don't speak Japanese, right there, it's really important that you go in armed with just enough, saying like, right, even if you can just say, for example, like, what is asthma? Zensoku, right? Zensoku, like that kind of thing, right? And then they can be like, okay, well, let's get you an inhaler or something like that, right? Like, it's really, really important that you arm yourself with that kind of information beforehand. So anyway, 5-year saga hopefully has come mostly to an end. I'm sure there'll be some trouble here and there, but I'm not going to get away from a rice field allergy in relative countryside parts of Japan, right? It's just not going to happen, but there you go. Yeah. So anyhow, let's take a sip of our delicious, refreshing tap water. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the election, I suppose, and about politics and sort of America's image. A couple weeks ago, I suppose just about a month ago now, I was on Simon no Charama, a weekly live stream with a guy by the name of Simon, who used to be part of a group called Three Old Dudes. They're three old is a little bit harsh, but three middle-aged gentlemen would have been a more fitting name, perhaps. But anyhow, I really enjoy being on his show. That was the second time I've been on his show, and anyway, we were talking, and at some point the conversation came to like, is there anything you miss about the States? And that sort of led to this discussion about maybe how the perception of the country has changed since I've been here. And yeah, I think I moved here in 2014, at the tail end of 2014. And so in the time that I'd been here, the States had federally legalized gay marriage, and Obama was still president when I moved over, and that kind of thing. And so most of what I heard in those first couple of years, I guess it would have been the first year and some change, was quite positive. Like, I can remember feeling congratulated, or not feeling congratulated, being congratulated by students and people when I went to the bar and stuff like that. Not complete strangers, mind you, friends and stuff like that. And and that kind of thing. And it's not to say that everybody thought everything the States was doing was good. The Okinawa issue, for example, was as big of a problem as it is now, I suppose. And yeah, that was a thing. But a lot of what I heard at that point was, I can't tell you how many times I heard that, like, well, America means freedom, and so blah 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 blah, and America means freedom, and so blah 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 blah, that kind of thing, right? And there was still an understanding that maybe America was sort of like, generally speaking, a positive force. Now, I say there's some understanding, that means that it's a fact. I should say that was the general opinion that I encountered, right? Um, and then in 2016, after the 2016 election, and shortly thereafter following President Trump's inauguration, well, even at that point, a lot of what I heard was like, oh, I think it's pretty good that he became president because, he puts America first, and I really like that kind of leader who puts their own country first, right? It's kind of I think you can understanding that, I suppose, the general Japanese mindset that you encounter. And I heard a lot of that at the beginning, and to be honest, I wasn't happy about it. I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't either time, and but it was what it was, and that's just how the system works. Um, we don't need to get into all the other stuff because it's beyond the point. But to speak to the point, to make sure we stay on track here. Over the last 3 or 4 years, what I have encountered an increasing amount is sort of like, what the hell is going on kind of thing, like, I can tell you that I cannot count on both hands how many times I've been told, well, maybe this is the end kind of thing, like America wa owari, that kind of thing, right? America's finished kind of thing. And it's mostly due, I suppose, to like a lot of the human rights violations that have been happening, and these sort of policies that have been enacted to sort of not too sort of necessarily, but have in effect weakened our international alliances, and things of that effect. And again, we don't need to get into that too much, but basically the idea was like, okay, well, it used to be that you could at least rely on the States to kind of help be like how can I say it? like a good structure, right? Like a, God, what is the word? Like a stabilizer, right? At the very least, even if there was some bad shit that the States was doing, and they would at the very least serve as a stabilizing force economically, politically, that kind of thing, right? And then it became the fact that's like, okay, well, we can't really trust the States to do that anymore. And you began to hear a lot more distrust from people being like, okay, well, at what point is Trump just going to decide that either Japan's going to pay to be defended by the States, or right, Japan is either going to do that, or the States is going to be like, okay, well, it's not worth it to protect you anymore, and like, basically to have that alliance thrown away because it's not terribly beneficial to people in the U.S. basically, or to the administration would be a better way to put it. And of course, that's not saying anything about kind of how unrealistic that would be, as far as, because Japan remains such an important kind of point, sort of geopolitically, for kind of maintaining a presence in this part of the world. And it doesn't really matter, again, that's not the point, but right, you started hearing more and more of this, and then especially over the last year, right, particularly leading up to the election, when a lot of stuff was happening, as far as like, okay, well, right, as far as like a lot of particularly the racial trouble that it's not as though it just started happening, right, but particularly came to a head with things like the killing of George Floyd and things of that nature, and the great, amazing sort of uprising of Black Lives Matter protests, and that kind of thing. And then sort of the people who, at the very least, were using Trump as a figurehead to kind of rally around white nationalist causes. And you started hearing more of like people being like, okay, well, isn't, like, what there's some kind of disconnect here. Like America is about freedom and equality, but but right. And I think of course it speaks a little bit to the ignorance of what's been happening in the States for 200 years, that people, it takes something as big as the explosive BLM protests that started happening early on in the year, to sort of awaken people to kind of the trouble that has been happening for a very, very long time. But then suddenly, I think because of that, it was in people's faces, and people had to kind of come face to face with the reality of it. And so all of this to say that, coming back to the question that we kind of came to on Simon no Chanama was, okay, well, generally speaking, I think the United States is not viewed as what it was, for sure. And I think on a personal level too, I think that's certainly changed a lot. I think for those of you who I know on a little bit more of a personal level through YouTube, or maybe it just comes across in my videos generally if we only ever interact in the comments, is like, I've never really been like a, America, like, I've never been a jingoist. I'm a patriot, I suppose, in some ways, but I'm not a nationalist or any of that. More than anything, I suppose I'm a humanist, I'm a globalist, and all that kind of thing. And so I never really felt like, oh yeah, America, that kind of thing. It just wasn't part of my makeup. But I felt proud, I suppose, that I could come and be somewhat of an ambassador for the country and show, like, yeah, like, there are good people in America that aren't just like thinking only about themselves, or people who want to do good things and help other people and that kind of thing. And I felt proud that people were sort of like telling me all these good things about my country, like congratulating me about gay marriage, for example, that kind of thing. I didn't have anything to do with it, of course. But I had some pride, and I understood that, or I believed that, generally speaking, America was a force for good, and just I knew how much bad the States was doing, but I also understood that at least in the best version of itself, it was something great, I guess. And I think as at least the people around me sort of fell out of love with the country, I think in some way maybe my view became, I don't know if realistic is necessarily the correct word, but at the very least jaded. And I don't know if that's fair or unfair. That requires a little bit more thought, I suppose. But yeah, and it's something I think that I wanted to talk about a little bit, because I can see on the cesspool that is Facebook and Twitter, like, how many I kept seeing, like, never before has the United States been viewed so strongly or so well around the world, kind of thing. And I looked at it and just thought, the fuck are you talking about? Like, you know? So anyway, it's a little bit more of a political subject than we normally touch on the channel, but it seemed to be particularly what's going on now with the election, which, by the way, the fact that the election is still being is it being contested, really? Is it realistically being contested? I don't know. But from what I see, it's still, at the very least, Donald Trump has not conceded to President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris. And that, too, is becoming another point of people like, okay, what is going on in the States, kind of thing. So it seemed relevant to talk about. And anyway, that's where we'll stop, I suppose. Guys, please feel free to talk about what I talked about, either with healthcare or with the political, the view of the States and that kind of thing in the comments, but please do not turn it into a Facebook chat thread. I'm not gonna put up with like the stuff that you see on there as far as like politics. If you want to talk politics, it's cool, of course, but be respectful. That's all I ask. I don't think we're gonna have trouble on this channel, because most people tend to be really respectful to each other, and we maintained a pretty positive community so far, but hopefully just being a little bit political doesn't change that. So anyway, guys, thanks always for watching. These will be out more regularly now that I'm sort of feeling healthy. Again, for those of you on Patreon, please keep an eye out either today after this video goes live or tomorrow. for some updates to the Patreon service, my little nook, my little piece of the Patreon service, and I'll see you all very soon indeed. Cheers.